Heidi, Sutton Turner, COO of Vanderbloemen, and I'm here with Chantel McHenry. She is the Director of Special Initiatives and Operations for Vanderbloemen. She is the leader of our diversity practice, which is not only consulting, it's diversity placement and then coaching after the search. So how are you doing today, Chantel?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. It's a beautiful day in Houston, and I sure
Yes.
appreciate you having me on the podcast today.
Well, this is great. I really want to hit from the standpoint of a pastor of a church that feels like during this time period, and by the way, not everybody, pastor, not every church is going to call us about diversity, but the few churches that do, we're trying to equip our team to help them as much as possible. And so today, I really want to hit that pastor that is leading a white church that feels like he or she wants to lead their congregation in becoming more diverse, more people of
Mhm.
color that is in their church, and kind of walk through us the change that they're going to need to make in order for that to happen.
Yeah, so part of the change, one is just changing their mindset, right? Kind of as a man thinketh, so is he. That's what the Bible tells us. So sometimes we have to shift our mind because if we are not really thinking about diversity when we're looking to hire a new person on our team, specifically probably someone in the leadership realm, then we tend to just gather those that are like minded or from our community or they go to school with our children, those sorts of things, right? Familiarity. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to really kind of get outside the box in your mind. And when you do that, then you will allow conversation to come forth in your leadership executive meetings about diversity. Start having those conversations with your executive team. Talk about what does that look like? What roles might be available? And the equity piece when we talk about diversity, you might have to create a role. Maybe there's
Mm.
not an existing role already on your team, but maybe you should create a role where you can bring someone in of color that can sit on your executive team and then begin to help you make the intentional changes that you are desiring to see on your staff and in your congregation.
Wow. So what you're saying is, if I'm the pastor of this church, and let's say most churches in America between 200 on an ongoing weekend and 600 on an ongoing weekend. So relatively, what we like to call at Vanderbloemen, normal sized church, they might
Mhm,
have three, four, maybe five people on staff. And
mhm,
so what you're saying is, as the church grows, or as they have some turnover, for them to be intentional with that hiring to hire diverse candidates. So it's so the connection to having a church that looks more like heaven or that is more diverse with more people of color first starts at the leadership level in the staff.
absolutely. It's biblical, right? It's the leadership, the headship. Everything flows down from the head. You know, the anointing that flowed down from Aaron, right? It flowed from the head. So we have to deal with leadership first. So that means diversifying your leadership team, finding that executive pastor, finding the pastor over your ministries or your operations that can now come and sit on your leadership board and begin to help you make decisions from a different vantage point because they're coming in with the mindset of Black people, Latinx people, Asian American people, and how to include them, involve them in the ministry work that you're doing. And oftentimes that means changing what your collaterals look like, the promotional material that you put out, being intentional about, oh, well, does this reflect what we want our congregation to look like? Do I see a Black person on the flyer? Do I see a Asian mom on the flyer? Those sorts of things. So having someone of color that sits on your leadership team is, in my opinion, the very first step outside of opening up your mind.
So what do you think, as far as what are your thoughts around some of the practices that need to be broken?
That's a great question. So, a lot of times in any industry, but especially in church, we get pretty caught up in our traditions. And sometimes in our traditions, we find that we become more exclusive than actually bringing new people into our space and environment. And so, what we're thinking when we talk about diversity is just really one, opening up your mind to the fact that, you know what, whenever I sit down, especially at my decision making table, I'm seeing the same kind of people. They all shop where I shop. Their children go to the same school that my kids go to. So we're kind of staying in what I would consider to be a bubble. I mean, as a Christian, I lived in a bubble for a very long time. I just didn't expand my world. And so everyone that I interacted with, they thought like me as it related to my theology. They responded to social things that were going on in the world the same way that I did, because I was not kind of opening myself up to the entire world. And the Great Commission is that we go into all of the world, not just into our neighborhoods and our communities. So I think one, just opening up the mind to expand that there's some change that I could actually do. And one, let's start with the individual, and then how can you influence others that are sitting sort of around that table with you. When you start at the decision making table, what we would call in a corporate setting the boardroom, when you really get into the boardroom and start talking about hard issues, that's when you're going to see changes in your staff. That's when you'll see changes in your membership and in the community, not just your 5 mile radius community, but the community that you have the opportunity to reach, which is so diverse and so vast. And right now we're just staying a little too locked into our bubble.
So there might be pastors that are listening to us and they're thinking, okay, I really want as a church body, to reach more people of color. Let's assume that most or a good portion of people that are listening to us are white. And so
Okay.
they're in a predominantly white church. And they're saying, I want the church to reach more African Americans and more people of color because I want my church to look more like heaven. Okay. So from that mindset, what's one of the first things that they need to do and break to because their overall goal is new people into their church, but what are some of the things that they need to first think about?
Yeah, so it goes back to that boardroom mentality, right? So it's in the hiring aspect, and it's probably a great time to reassess. How are you sourcing candidates, new hires for your church? Are you going to your friends' friends and hiring them? Are you going to your seminary that you attended and most of the people attended in your congregation? Is that where you're going to source your candidates? Because you'll oftentimes get the same thing that you've always gotten. So it's really in that hiring practice that people will need to start expanding and reaching in other places. As a person of color, when you walk into any type of Christian organization that you're considering being a part of, you're looking to see what their leadership team looks like. And so if their leadership team does not reflect your family, you start thinking pretty strongly about whether or not this is the place you want to worship, because you start thinking, well, will my son or my daughter be able to relate to the other children? Will they be able to understand some of the examples that are coming from youth ministry, from the adult
Right.
stage, right? Because maybe examples are from white America, which is different. We watched Good Times, right? We didn't watch the Partridge Family. So if
Mm-hmm.
your examples are of the Partridge Family, then that's going to go over people's heads. So it's really making sure that you have people that are at your leadership table that are helping you to create a culture of belonging, a culture that encourages diversity of color, diversity of culture, diversity of experience, life experience. So that would be, I think, the very first thing that I would think to start with. And that is,
So what
yes.
you're saying is I want, I'm the pastor of this church. I
Mhm.
want a church that is more diverse, a population of people in my congregation, members of my church, to be more
Mhm.
diverse. And so,
Mhm.
what you're first telling me is that my leadership team needs to become more diverse, and then my staff needs to become more diverse before the end result will be that the congregation will change.
Absolutely. It's just the
Okay.
trickle down effect, right? So the reason you start with your leadership is because you don't understand Black America. You don't understand Latinx America. And so you have to have people that are sitting at the table that are helping you to infuse cultural things into your programming, into your weekly events, into your promotional material that you put out about your church. So it all starts, it's biblical, right?
Mhm.
It all starts at the head. And so when the things that the head happens, the body follows. And so
Right.
when the leadership at the head are making critical, important decisions as it relates to racial diversity, you will then begin to see your congregation shift and change in that aspect.
Okay. So, um, as we look at, so we say, okay, I got to now hire staff that is more diverse. And if I'm a pastor leading mostly a white or leading a white church, I'm
Mhm.
spending all of my time with my congregation. Okay. So I don't know any black people. Okay. So how, I don't understand. So take me from, I'm a pastor. I got a desire for my congregation to be more diverse. You're now
Mhm.
telling me that our staff needs to be more diverse, but every time I hire somebody, it's a rush because somebody didn't give me notice, or somebody transitioned, or something else happened, and I don't have. And so what I've done in the past is I've just gone and hired friends. Do you know somebody that can do this? Do you know of somebody that can do this? And as a result, the people that have come have been white. So what do I
Mhm.
do? What do I change?
Yeah. So, and I know this isn't a word that church organizations like to hear, but sometimes you just have to slow down. So, yeah, maybe someone left and didn't give you enough notice. So, can you shift responsibility temporarily amongst several staff members in order to, because when you're hiring for diversity, it is going to take you longer than it normally would to fill the position because there is intentionality that has to happen. So now you're reaching out to seminaries that a lot of people of color would go to. You're reaching out to HBCUs, right? Historically Black colleges and universities to find, especially their divinity schools, their biblical schools, to find people of color. And so that will take you longer, especially if you haven't developed those relationships. But at the end, when you're looking to hire a diverse person, just pick up the phone and call Vanderbloemen because
There you
we're
go.
already making those connections. We're
Right.
already sourcing in those industries to help you find a diverse candidate. It's just going to take a little bit longer than it normally does. So the senior pastor, the lead pastor, the pressure is not on him. The pressure now is shifted to us where we can really help walk you through your next hire because it's important. If you don't slow down, take the time, do the intentional work, you
Yeah.
will continue to get the same type of results. And you'll still be sitting at your executive leadership table saying, we've got to become diverse.
Okay, so what do I need to do as the pastor of this church? What do I need to do to prepare my staff um, to, to welcome a person of color, the first person of color? I mean, this is a first. This is groundbreaking as it relates to my church, a culture breaking as it relates to historical breaking as it relates to my church. Do we need to do any prep work? Do I need to prepare the staff? What do I need to do in preparation as Vanderbloemen goes out to try to find a diverse candidate?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. So it's just like all of the agricultural examples that we get in the Bible, right? There's a tilling of the ground, a preparing of the soil that senior pastor, that leadership team will have to be actively engaged in. I don't want to put everything on the senior pastor, right? He has a great responsibility of leading the church, not just culturally, but also in the word, right? So it might be great for him to find a champion on his team, someone that wants to carry that banner of diversity and is willing to, someone who's willing to kind of help educate the
Okay.
staff and bring them along. So most church staffs, they're having weekly chapel, they're
Mhm.
having weekly, maybe little Bible studies among the staff. Those are great opportunities to then start talking to your team about the intentional change, but just don't talk to them. Let them give some feedback. Let them give input. You might even want to do a survey. We actually have a diversity readiness checklist that people can take. It's free of charge. You could send your entire staff to go and take that checklist, which is asking some pretty pointed questions about diversity. And we're, as a firm, we will also do a staff survey on with your staff if you'd like us to, just to get their perspective on diversity. And do they feel like voices are heard when it's coming from someone other than the executive leadership team?
So let me ask you a question on the candidate side of this. So we're looking for a candidate for this church, and a diverse candidate specifically. What type of person is going to be successful being the first African American or person of color on the staff to lead a diversity change at a church like this? So talk to me about that candidate.
Yeah, that candidate has to have a heart for a multicultural advancement in our churches, right? They have to also understand that they are coming to that organization, that Christian organization, with purpose. And so there will be things that they will have to help educate the executive leadership team about, help to educate the staff. So they have to know they're not just going for a job, they are really going with purpose that
Mm.
the Lord, right? Because when we're searching for candidates, we're really depending on God to intervene. It's just like we're the vehicle, but we're expecting him to find that right candidate for our client. And so when we're looking for that person should also have purpose in their heart towards diversity. We're not asking for someone to go in and be radical in any way. It is a
Right.
person who goes in to work alongside the existing leadership team to help bring about change. It's change management, and it happens in many areas. And in this specific area, we're talking about diversity. So in any change management, leadership has to be very clear. You have to be clear with your vision. You have to continue to repeat the vision. You can't say it once to the staff and then never mention it again, and then your diverse hire shows up. So the candidate going in really has to know they're going in with purpose.
That's great. And one of the things, Chantel, I just want to make sure our listeners know, when we're talking about diversity practice, this is something that Chantel leads, and not only to go find that candidate, but the consulting work on the front end and the coaching post placement of that candidate, so that not only the organization, that the church gets some consulting work on how to walk through that change, but also you're giving some support and coaching to that candidate that is now a pastor of that church. And so it's not like you're going to place this person and leave. You're wanting to stay in and to help that church walk through that change.
Absolutely. Our heart is for relationship building, and we try, even in our searches currently, we want to make sure that we hear what our uh, clients are wanting, what our churches and nonprofits and Christian organizations, what they're wanting, and then we are intentional about building and developing that relationship. Well, we want to do the same things with our candidates. We want to make
Right.
sure that when they're going into such a purposeful position, that is destined to change the organization, to make it look a little bit more like heaven, and bring that diversity to that organization, we want to champion them. We want to help them. We want to give them a place where they can call and uh, be a sounding board for them, you know, have some coaching around ideas that they're thinking about and how to implement. It's one thing to have an idea, it's another thing to come up with a strategic plan on how to execute those ideas, and how does that impact your, not just your staff, but your congregation as well. So absolutely, we want to make sure that we are walking with our candidates that are being placed in those diverse roles.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Chantel. I just appreciate your heart for the church in general, the Big C Church, and also the individual churches that believe that God's called them um, to diversify their congregation, and they're looking for some help. And so I pray that the Lord uses you in an amazing way to help a whole lot of churches in this next season.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Sutton. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.